Shalom, shalom. You're listening to Live Internet Studies. This is episode number 317. My name is Ariel, ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Let's open with a quick word of prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, Lord, right now as of the date of this recording, which is September 28th, 2025, we are in the middle of the fall festivals. We just completed Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah, as it's called in the Bible, the day of the awakening trumpet blast, with this theme, Lord, of awaken, O sleeper. These themes are very fascinating. Perhaps they are talking about awaking from spiritual slumber. They most certainly carry that theme. Perhaps they're talking about resurrection, rapture. They seem to carry that theme as well. Either way we look at it, Lord, we are thankful that you have given us these special days so that we can learn of you and that we can anticipate your return. We don't know if it's going to happen on some future Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets. We don't know if it's going to happen then in the future. It didn't happen this year, as disappointing as that turned out to be for many Christians. Nevertheless, Lord, humble us and continue to keep us in a attitude of expectation. For just because you didn't return this year on the Jewish New Year doesn't mean you're not going to return one year or one day. We know you will return. So we are the ones that need to just continue to keep ourselves filled with your Spirit, walking in forgiveness, turning from sin, seeking your face, and just open to truths that you're revealing to us. Thank you for the other festivals that are yet to be experienced by us. We still have Yom Kippur right around the corner next week. And then right after that, 5 days after that, we have the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. So thank you, Lord. Again, all of these festivals point to messianic realities. I like to call them dress rehearsals of messianic redemption. They point to the economy and work of God in Messiah Yeshua, the work that he is doing here on our behalf and doing for us and will do in the future. And so we'll continue to study your words with anticipation. Be with us tonight as we embark on these two topics that we're ready to dive into. They are quite difficult, and I admit that I don't have all the answers. And so I ask that you will open the words up to our understanding and help us make application. We'll be careful, Lord, to give you the praise and the glory. B'Shem Yeshua, Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies week after week. Just very briefly, it is an hour and a half long, full study, 2 segments. First segment is end time topics, eschatology. And the second topic or segment is 30 minutes. It is kind of Trinitarian type topics. Let's jump into topic 13. This is where we left off. We're talking about Mystery Babylon. We're having this discussion on the identity of Mystery Babylon. We're working our way basically verse by verse through the book of Revelation, chapters 17 and 18. And we're using a book by the author Chris White entitled Mystery Babylon. Wow, I didn't bring up the book this time. I'll flash it in for those of you in YouTube land. It is a book that, in fact, you know what? I think I could bring it up here. Give me a moment. I do have it bookmarked in my list here. There we go. Let's take a look at this book cover. It is right here. Mystery Babylon, When Jerusalem Embraces the Antichrist, an exposition of Revelation 17 and 18. So we're working from this thesis. As shocking as it sounds, could Mystery Babylon be end times Jerusalem? We don't mean the Jerusalem of today, although it's likely to be the same location on the map. But what I mean is the Jerusalem that enters into the 70th week of Daniel. Could that be Mystery Babylon? All right. Let's jump into the study itself. We're really on week 3, the angel's interpretation of the vision. So let's do a little bit of recap. So last week in chapter 1, we're going to jump into chapter 2 today, okay? Last week, which was week 2, but chapter 1 of Chris White's book. What we did is we studied John's initial vision of the woman and the beast from Revelation 17, and we read and focused on the first 6 verses. And we were looking at her garments. And what we noticed is we saw that the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet. And this reminded us that she was basically adorned like a false priest. And when we say priest here, we don't mean like a Catholic priest. Although, an interesting parallel is that Catholicism's clergy models their garments after biblical Israelite priests, right? Levitical priests. So what we did is we went into the Bible and noticed all of the similarities, well, not exhaustively, but the similarities between the way the ancient priests adorn themselves and how this woman who's an adulteress, how she's adorning herself. And she's presenting herself, among other things, as a queen, but as a false priest. Now, she doesn't call herself false priest, but that's the way that we need to see her. She's holding a golden cup, and it's not full of sanctified blood. It's not catching blood of animals that God has approved of. Rather, it's a cup full of abominations. And she herself is drunk on these abominations. And also, she's drunk on the blood of the prophets, which we're going to read out here in a moment, and the nations themselves. By the time she plays her part in the last days, will also be drunk on the abominations that she actually is pouring out and causing them to drink. So we saw that she was drunk with the blood of the prophets, which unfortunately points directly to Jerusalem, the only city Jesus says was guilty of killing the prophets. This is also a difficult verse to reckon with because at face value, it doesn't make sense when Jesus says that Jerusalem was guilty of the deaths of the prophets, of the deaths of the righteous, going all the way back to righteous Abel, to Zechariah, whom you slew between the porch and the altar, right? He labels this indictment against them. I can almost hear them objecting. Wait a minute, bub. We didn't kill Abel. That was Cain. You can't put that on us. But somehow Jesus does. And so we've got to factor in that from God's vantage point, Israel is this representative, a priest among all nations, right? That's who Israel is. She's a priestly nation. She has priests within her own order. And just like the priests represent the people to God, then Israel represents the nations before God. And so I can begin to see how this charge of Israel is guilty of killing all the prophets. Well, Mystery Babylon now is charged with the blood of the prophets, meaning she killed them. So those are ways that we can start to identify her. We ended last week with the shocking realization that it's possible that when John wondered, because it says when I saw her in verse 6, Revelation 17:6, he says, I wondered greatly. Why did he wonder greatly? Could it be because he likely recognized this woman as Jerusalem, the covenant city of God, now allied with the Antichrist? As shocking as that could be, we're making this proposal, this thesis that Chris White is putting forth, that end time Jerusalem could be the seat of Antichrist's religious power for a short time until he actually destroys her. He and the 10 kings that side with him. We read in Revelation 17 that they are going to burn her with fire eventually, likely near the end of the 7th week. But for a short time, he's going to declare Jerusalem as his religious capital. We already know exclusively from several places in the Bible, most notably 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I was just reading it tonight with my my good study buddy. Let me pull it up here for you and show you. Sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. Here we go. Let me go backwards. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4 has Paul talking about, and I'm just showing it to you in a few different versions, but I'm scrolling down to the NASB. This Antichrist figure who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he does what? He takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. So we might object to the proposal that Mystery Babylon is eschatological Jerusalem. But what we cannot object to is the biblical reality that one day the Antichrist is going to go into the temple. It will be standing at that point in time, some structure that allows animal sacrifices. He will go in there. We don't know to what degree he's going to desolate it. If he follows in the footsteps of Antiochus Epiphanes, he'll pour pig's blood or pig urine, I can't remember which one it was, all on the altar and the furniture and desecrate it that way. Set up a temple in the image of Zeus and declare with his likeness on it, thus effectively declare himself to be God, because Zeus was the state deity, one of the state deities at the time, if not the state deity of the Greek Empire at the time. So likewise, Antichrist proper, the future Antichrist, of which Antiochus was a type and shadow, a shadow. The future Antichrist is going to do something similar. We just read it there in Paul. How will he desecrate the temple? Declaring himself to be God, setting up an image we read about in Revelation chapter 13 as well, demanding the worldwide worship of himself. We also know that the false prophet will find a way to endorse that and force the world to worship the statue, which is the worship of the beast, which is the worship of Satan, right? It all points back to worship of Satan. And this is part of the reason why this is so abominable, is because God's holy city, God's very temple, will be the seat of Satan's throne for a short time. So you can disagree with Chris White's thesis that eschatological Jerusalem will be Mystery Babylon, but you cannot disagree with Paul's statement that Antichrist, aka Satan incarnate, will seat himself in the temple of God and declare worldwide worship of himself, and the world will worship him for a time. You can't disagree with that. So for a time being, Jerusalem will be the seat of Antichrist's power, thus Satan's power. It's a short step from simply recognizing that that is Mystery Babylon in its expression. So let's keep going. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to continue going into chapter 2 of Chris White's book. And we're going to keep going just through a few more verses. If I can time it right, we'll get through verses 7 through 18, where the angel begins to interpret this vision for John. This is really nice when the angel does the interpreting. We don't have to start speculating on our own. So here's my plan for the night. We're going to, number one, we're going to read the angel's explanation in Revelation 17, 7 through 18. Number two, we're going to unpack the meaning of the beast. Remember, there's at least two major players in Revelation chapter 17, three if you want to count the 10 kings. But the two main players are the woman herself, that's the city, and the beast that she's riding. And the beast is both a leader and a system, but we're going to focus primarily on the leader aspect of him. So we'll unpack the meaning of the beast, the one who was, is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. Number three, we're going to examine the 7 heads and the 10 horns. This is where the beast and the system kind of have overlapping themes. On the one hand, Antichrist is a man. He takes himself in the temple. He takes his seat in the temple and declares himself to be God. That's something a man does. He sets up an image for the world to worship. That's something a man will do. This man, however, will be the leader of a system, a leader of a worldwide nation, a worldwide global power of some sort that will have its tendrils in every facet of human existence if he can have his way, right? He'll be in politics, he'll be in commerce, he'll be in trade, he'll be in religion, he'll be in health, who knows? He'll be wherever he can be. He'll probably be in entertainment as well. You know how the world works these days. Everybody's drunk with whatever idol they've erected for themselves, and the Antichrist is going to have his way and be inside of every idol that he can. He'll probably have his own pop song and everything, right? So we're going to examine the 7 heads and the 10 horns, see what we can glean from what the angel is going to tell us about this beast. Number 4 in our goals for tonight, we're going to see why this rules out Rome as Mystery Babylon. Now, I want to kind of tip my hand early and let you know that Chris White is not opposed to the idea that Rome could be part of the identity of the beast and his system. Just Chris White is rejecting Rome as Mystery Babylon. So when we talk about revived Roman Empire or revived Islamic Caliphate or New York City as the candidate for Mystery Babylon, I think a lot of people, what they're doing is they're conflating Mystery Babylon's identity with the identity of the beast itself. And that's, I think, a mistake that is made on the part of Bible students. What Chris White is trying to suggest is that Mystery Babylon is the city and the beast and its empire are separate entities. And therefore, when we talk about Rome, Rome doesn't seem to fit the bill as Mystery Babylon, but a revived Roman Empire, that could work. All right. And then point number 5, we'll look at how the Antichrist eventually turns against the harlot city, right? Which even in and of itself proves that kind of logically speaking, it proves that it proves that Mystery Babylon can't be Rome, because that would be Rome turning on its own revived empire, right? That would be really weird if the capital city of the revived Roman Empire, aka Rome, turned, or the Vatican City, or wherever you guys think it is, right? If that capital city turned on its own empire, or the opposite, the empire turned on its own capital city, right? It'd be like Americans storming the White House and burning down Washington, D.C. To what end, right? I'm not sure why that would have to be the case. Now, don't put it past me again. Some of this is speculation, so I could be wrong. Maybe Mystery Babylon is Rome, and then the revived Roman Empire decides to cannibalize its own city. Okay, I don't think so. All right, so as we work our way down through these points, we're going to find out this is where the picture becomes much clearer and much darker at the same time. All right, let's turn to basically part 1, which I've labeled a kind of a reading of Revelation 17, 7 through 18. And I've labeled in my notes here, I'm estimating that this should take me about 10 to 12 minutes to read down through these and then go back and look at the details. So let's read the rest of Revelation 17 together, verses 7 through 18. We'll start with 7 and 8 first. Okay. All right, so we're starting in Revelation 17. We're going to start in verse 7. We're going to read 7 and 8 first, right? So Revelation 17:7, this is the NASB version of the Bible, as you can see on your screen right now. It reads, "And the angel said to me," this is great, the angel is interpreting what John just saw. "The angel said to me, why do you wonder?" Remember, John said, "I wondered greatly," last part of verse 7. I wondered greatly when he saw this. The angel says, "Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." And then verse 8, the angel says, "The beast that you saw." Now, this is interesting. Let me back up. In the previous verse, he says, "I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has a head." But then the first thing out of his mouth is the beast. He doesn't say the woman, right? He decides, I'm going to save the woman for last. Let me start with the beast underneath her. All right. Don't know why the angel did that, but that's his prerogative. "The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss." Now that's cryptic, but we're going to unpack it tonight. "And this beast is going to go to destruction." And he continues, "And those who live on the earth," this is a kind of a technical term in the book of Revelation, the earth dwellers. It refers to those whose names are not we're going to see here, those whose names, the angel says, have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So it's referring to unsaved people, right? These will do what? They will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. Now, those of you who are astute Bible students, those Bereans out there, you should be instantly recognizing the counterfeit language that the Antichrist, the beast, is given by the angel when it talks about that he was and is not and will come. This is reminiscent of Yeshua's own statement that I am the one who was and is not, the one who was and is to come, right? The one who lived and died and resurrected. So keep that motif in mind as we're working our way down through these details about this particular Antichrist. In fact, it's one of the first things that I bring out in my little essay here. Here we see the counterfeit resurrection of the Antichrist. He mimics the death and resurrection of Christ, deceiving the world into worshiping him. This is very important because when we go back to Revelation chapter 13, which we aren't studying verse by verse, but you need to go back and read it on your own, it's where we're first introduced to this beast that rises out of the sea, this Antichrist figure, which is also a world system, right? The beast is both a man and a king and a system, right? And in some way he's actually the dragon. He's Satan himself, right? He's all of these things wrapped up together, depending on which part of the prophecy is in question, is under examination. He's either being described as a man or as a kingdom. But point is, he seems to find it necessary to imitate Messiah's death, resurrection, so that he can fool the people as being either Jesus himself or finishing the work that Jesus began, right? So what I'm saying is Antichrist will either be in place of Messiah, he will either oppose Messiah, or he will claim to be Jesus himself, something to that effect. Hard to say exactly which one he's going to do. Different people might even see him different ways. I can imagine there'll be a whole group of people who say, it's Jesus. Another group of people saying, no, it's Messiah. Another group of people saying, no, it's another one of the Messiahs. You know how the world religions work today. They all just kind of overlap different images and shadows and types of figures that they deem important. And in the end, in the name of ecumenical inclusiveness, we kind of blend everything together and allow for all of those views to kind of coexist at the same time. But one thing that's certain is that even if this Antichrist figure doesn't really die and resurrect, because we know that only God has the power to resurrect, one thing is certain, the world will believe that he does. So it's kind of a moot point whether he truly resurrects or whether he fakes a death and resurrection. The world's reaction is already told. It's already mentioned in the Bible that they are going to worship him. Go back to Revelation chapter 13 and pick up where it seems to connect those two themes, that his resurrection results in the worldwide worship. So he mimics the death. I'm of the impression that it is a real death and resurrection, and it's because God himself allows it, which is part of what I believe Paul talked about as the great deception that God pours out on the world who refuse to embrace the truth. Let's keep reading through Revelation. Let's now read verse 9 through 11. All right, John continues. Here's the mind which has wisdom, the angel says. The 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. And then verse 10, let's see, how far did I say I was going to go? To 11. All right. Verse 10 says, speaking of the 7 heads and the 7 mountains, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. Notice it's using language that's definitely indicative of a human. We'll parse that. We'll flesh that out in a bit. pun intended. Verse 11, the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth and is one of the seven, and he goes to destruction. All right, that's as far as we're going to read at the moment. All right, let's go back and see what we can glean from what we just read. Now, I think that this is crucial. I could be wrong, but just listen up. The text plainly says the heads are kings. So let's unpack that in a moment. All right, so I'm kind of teasing you right now. Let's continue reading the next two verses, 12 through 14. Let's read those now. The 10 horns, the angel says, which you saw, are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. Very short time. We're not sure exactly why. I'm of the impression that it could indicate either the last 3.5 years, or it could just be a physical 1 hour that they have power. But I don't think that means that they have no power prior to that. I just think that they are going to be perhaps promoted in some way at the time of the end when the Antichrist needs to call upon them, and that's why it says they kind of receive this authority. They receive authority as kings, but this doesn't really indicate that they're not kings prior to that. But either way, the angel continues in verse 13, says, these, speaking of those 10 kings, they have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. And we also know from reading earlier in Revelation 13 that the beast gets his power from Satan. So in the end, this is going to be one big Luciferian machine that's driving this last final beast empire, this eighth beast empire. Actually, I'm of the impression that the seventh beast empire also hasn't existed yet. The seventh beast empire will come on the world scene to some degree, led by the Antichrist. He's that seventh head, and then he gets assassinated, comes back to life, and then that coming back to life turns him into the eighth leader of his own eighth empire, which is probably maybe the two sides of his career in the 70th week of Daniel. Maybe the first half could be more of a kind of a religious, benign, peaceful type of ruler, Messiah type of figure, but not declaring himself to be deity yet, not declaring himself to be God. He's not going to do that until the midpoint of the week, when he takes the mask off and reveals who he truly is. I think that's when Satan enters into him fully, and he becomes basically Satan incarnate. But the point I'm trying to speculate on right now, and I admit it is speculation, is that the first half of his career could be, indicate, or it could be characterized by more peace-going activities, animal sacrifices in Israel, someone that they recognize as their Messiah figure, perhaps very strongly political, but also religiously in favor of Israel and Jerusalem enjoying a preeminent place in the first half of the 70th week. What will that look like for the rest of the world? I think largely a measure of peace, but there will still be wars around the world because he'll have his opposition, people that oppose him. Where will Islam be at that point in time? Maybe they will be subjected at that point in time. Maybe they will be defeated. Maybe they'll be subjugated. Maybe they will be blended into a syncretistic form of Middle Eastern religion that includes Abrahamic faith, open and broad enough to allow for animal sacrifices, along with Islam right there on the Temple Mount. I mean, that's a tall order, I know. But either way, the second half of the 70th week seems to be that when the eighth beast empire post-resurrection, Antichrist will rule the world, and that's when he rules with an iron fist, like Thanos in the Avengers, right? He's got the golden glove on, that goblet, or not goblet, I'm sorry, that golden, the glove, the what was that thing called? He's got all the infinity stones on it. He's like, I'm ruler, right? I've got all the power. I'm holding all the cards. That's when he's like, worship me, like I said last week. All right. So these 10 kings at that point in time are going to be like, yes, we worship you, oh great and mighty political ruler and religious ruler or whatever. We worship you. They're going to give their purpose and power and authority to the beast. So let's go down into this one. And, I'm sorry. We need to read 12 through 14. I stopped short. I said 13. So we read about these 10 kings, and they're going to worship the beast. Also, they're going to give their power and authority to the beast. But what does the angel say, right? My Bible heading is Victory for the Lamb. Well, they are going to wage war against the Lamb. But the Lamb, we know to be Jesus, he's going to overcome them. Why? Because he's Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. FYI, as a side note, I used to kind of waffle back and forth on the notion that the saints will return from heaven with Yeshua on horses at the Battle of Armageddon. I used to kind of toy with the idea that, well, the Bible doesn't say in so many words that the Christians are going to come with him into battle. But this verse here is fairly close to really outright saying that without just outright saying it. We know that there's going to be a war against Yeshua fought in the Middle East in an area that is recognized by the Bible as Armageddon or Har Megiddo, the Valley of Megiddo, and the mountain of the Valley of Megiddo, which, where in the world is that, right? 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem these days. But they're going to battle against Yeshua, and he's going to, of course, overcome them. But notice it says those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. I think that called and chosen and faithful is, if we were to look up the Greek, we'll see that it's talking about these are the elect, is one of the Greek words there, the chosen there, the eklektos, if I remember. And these are what John recognizes elsewhere in his book as Christians. So I don't think these are angels. But it says those who are with them. Does this mean with him in battle? It could be. All right, let's go back to my notes here. So let's talk about the 10 kings for a minute. I already kind of hinted at this. The 10 kings form what appears to be a temporary alliance with the Antichrist, some type of political or military alliance. They give him their power, but Christ will ultimately defeat them. We're kind of working our way through just these snippets quickly, but we're going to unpack it in the other parts here, so don't worry if you think I'm going too fast. We're about 30 minutes into the study, and at this point in time, it will probably represent in my video files a good place to break week 3 into part A, and we'll continue looking at part B with the reading of Revelation 17, 15 through 18. Okay, so stay tuned. All right, let's keep reading Revelation 17. We're going to read verses 15 through 18 at this point in time. So let's pick up. Remember, the angel is giving John the interpretation of the vision. So it says, and he said to me, right, the angel, the waters. Remember, he's describing the woman and the beast that the woman's riding. The angel, started by describing the beast and the 10 kings. But now he's going to jump down to the waters and then finally give us a look at the beast himself, the woman herself. The waters which you saw, where the prostitute sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. We're going to unpack that in a little bit. Verse 16, and the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the prostitute. We're in verse 16. They're going to hate the prostitute, and they will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. Right? They don't like her for some reason. I have my speculations, but it doesn't say why here. but I have my suspicions. But let's continue reading 2 more verses. Verse 17, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. This could represent the part of the destruction of Mystery Babylon itself that we're going to later read about in chapter 18 of Revelation, where, Babylon, oh, Babylon the Great, how you have fallen, blah, 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 where it's borrowing all this language from both ancient Babylon of the Tanakh period, as well as borrowing language from ancient Jerusalem, who is the ancient harlot in the Bible as well, right? Both of those are kind of overlapping themes that make Mystery Babylon a good candidate for being eschatological Jerusalem. So let's read the final verse in chapter 17, which has John saying, the woman, right? I find this interesting. He tells the angel, he tells John very earlier on, let me tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that she's riding. And then he spends all this time talking about the beast. And then in one verse, he says, and the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Done. I'm like, come on. If I were John, I would have demanded a refund on that movie, because come on, angel, you gave me all these details about the beast and the waters and the tin horns, but what's up with the woman? One verse, she's the great city that reigns over the kings, and that's it. So it's almost like we're meant to focus more on the beast than the woman. So take it for what it's worth. Let's look at my notes here. So there it is. That's about all I can say. The angel explicitly says the woman is a great city. And what more can we say? So much for Mystery Babylon being just a system, right? I've heard people say that Mystery Babylon is a system, but that's not what the angel says. It's a city. It's a specific city. And as we'll see, according to Chris White's thesis, it's Jerusalem, eschatological Jerusalem, end times Jerusalem. If you look at Jerusalem today, she doesn't fit the bill. She needs to be much more important and much wealthier than she is right now in order to fit the bill for Mystery Babylon. Also, she needs to be more prominent when it comes to seafaring trade. Mystery Babylon is described as a kind of a port city, which Jerusalem is not on the coast, like Tyre or something like that, or even the Gaza Strip. Jerusalem is inland, right? I think it's 30 miles, something like that. But even if we said that even if we look at the candidate as Rome being Mystery Babylon, we also have to remember that Rome is also inland. And I think it's even farther inland than Jerusalem. Mecca, likewise, is inland, right? It's not on the coast. How about ancient Babylon itself? It's on the river's bank, right? It's on the bank of the river there, but it's not on the bank. It's not on the coast of the Persian Gulf itself. It's several hundred miles inland. So in these candidates for who's Mystery Babylon, and we start looking at details about it being a port city or something that can be that the smoke can rise and be seen from the ships that are on the sea, like we're going to read about in the next chapter of Revelation, chapter 18, when it's being destroyed. It would appear that perhaps out of all the candidates, Mecca, Rome, Jerusalem, Vatican City, or something like that, New York City, all of these candidates, perhaps maybe only New York City is the one that's truly right on the water's edge there. Manhattan is right there on the edge. But the other cities are inland to a degree that we'd have to see the smoke rising. But as we're going to see later on, I'm kind of tipping my cards early. If Jerusalem were set on fire, you could see the smoke easily from the Mediterranean Sea, from the coast, right? I heard that when 9/11 happened and the Twin Towers were burning, the smoke could be seen for hundreds of miles. So it doesn't seem to be a far stretch. Okay, so let's go into part 2. The beast that was, is not, and will come. Let's talk about this. All right. The first part of the angel's interpretation is about the beast. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of interesting that he goes there first. The angel says, the beast was, is not, and will come up out of the abyss. What does this mean? Now, Chris White, the author of the book that we're borrowing our notes from, he explains that this is describing the Antichrist's counterfeit resurrection. So we've got Revelation 13:3 again that we looked at. I'll flash it on the screen for you so you don't have to look it up on your own. It says, quote, and we didn't look at this directly, but going backwards into the book from Revelation 17 where we're at, we can borrow the notes there so we can begin to form the context of what John means by the beast that you saw that was and is not and comes up out of the abyss. In verse 3 of chapter 13, where we're first introduced to the beast, John writes, I saw one of its heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast, end quote. This is where we see that the seemingly, what I would say, cause and effect relationship or connection, correlation between the amazement of the earth and wondering and the following after the beast is directly connected to his resurrection, whether it be real, faked, or appeared to be resurrected. We don't know. I'm of the impression that he really will die and resurrect. It is a man, in my opinion. It's not just a system, it's not just a resurrected empire, like a revived Roman Empire or something to that effect. Although I think that plays into it. However, when we're talking about a resurrection, I think we're really talking about a man. So could we say that a man resurrects? Yes. Could we say that an empire resurrects? Yes. Again, both of them seem to work. I'm of the impression that both probably will. All right. So either way, looking just at Revelation 13:3, we could make this conclusion. We could say that this means that the Antichrist will appear to die, then come back to life in a satanic parody of Christ's death and resurrection. As I mentioned earlier, the Antichrist is going to find it necessary to either declare himself as Jesus, or declare himself as the Messiah, or declare himself in opposition to Messiah. Something to that effect. His name Antichrist carries those overlapping themes of against Christ, in place of Christ, opposed to Christ. But either way, a faked or an imitated death and resurrection would seem to do the trick, especially if he's trying to fool Christians, because Christians already know that Jesus died and resurrected, or at least it was spoken about that he died and resurrected. Remember, a lot of people read the Bible and don't believe everything to be factual. They just believe maybe that a lot of it was made up by Christians. So how that's going to factor in, I mean, genuine Christians know that Jesus did die and resurrected once already. So if Antichrist hits the scene and says, hey, guess what, everybody, I'm Jesus, come back from heaven to set up my kingdom, but then he gets shot in the head, dies, and then resurrects again, Christians should immediately spot the problem here. The Bible doesn't talk about Jesus dying twice and resurrecting twice, right? Remember, it says once and for all, right? I've read the book of Hebrews, did a study on it. Go to my website and read it. So having Jesus die twice and resurrect twice is a big red flag for genuine Christians. But for people in the world who don't quite follow the Bible closely, namely nominal Christians and maybe some religious Jews who kind of loosely followed their Jewish religion, having their Messiah die and rise from the dead again might be something that they say, well, yeah, okay, we're on board with that. Either way, what I go on to say is that the world will marvel, the lost will worship him. Now, notice the deception I say in my notes. Jesus is the one who was and is to come. Revelation 1:8. The beast mimics this by being the one who was, is not, and will come. It's a satanic counterfeit, right? Satan needs to have a kind of a list of career highlights that imitate the true Messiah. And one of these days I'll show you a list that Chris White put together. It's like about 10 different things or so. And it is scary the way that Antichrist is going to be able to possibly pull this off. But either way, when we talk about this concept of Antichrist being the one who's going to not just seek to deceive the world or seek to deceive Jews, but also seek to deceive Christians with his death and resurrection, which, again, could be God allowing him to be resurrected because God is going to send the strong delusion on those who refused to embrace the truth. That's Paul's words in 2 Thessalonians all over again. Either way, what I say in my notes is that this helps us understand why the nations follow him so willingly. They believe he has conquered death, and this sets the stage for his enthronement in Jerusalem's temple at the midpoint of the week. Let's keep going. We're making progress. Part 3, the 7 heads. Remember, the angel didn't answer the question in the order of the vision that John saw. He described it as woman, then beast, then the heads and things like that, in that order. But then when the angel unpacks the vision, he starts with the beast and the 7 heads and things like that. Then he talks about the woman very end. So let's talk a little bit about the 7 heads as kings, not hills, but kings. Now we come to one of the most debated verses in Revelation, which is verse 9. I've reproduced it here in my study here for you, so you don't have to look it up. It reads again, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. All right. I know what you're saying. All right. Many interpreters say, aha, there we go. 7 hills. That's Rome. There we go. Case closed, right? Everyone thinks it's Rome because it says 7 hills. Not so fast. Let's look closely. The angel says the heads are not just mountains, they're kings. All right? Specifically, look at my bullet points on the screen. 5 have fallen. 1 is. 1 has not yet come. And the 4th bullet point, the beast himself is an 8th, but belongs to the 7. So that's the breakdown of what the angel tells us. The heads are not just mountains. Yes, we can't erase that detail. He says they're mountains, but he says they're kings. This is clearly talking about kings, right? When we look at those 4 bullet points there, the 5 have fallen. 1 is yet has not yet come, and the beast himself is an 8th. This is clearly talking about kings and kingdoms, not geography, right? Chris White, in his book, the one that we're borrowing our notes from, he points out that if the heads were literal hills, then how could one of them die and come back to life? Okay, think about it. Use your brain. You can't kill and resurrect a hill, but you can kill and resurrect a king, the Antichrist, right? He's got a mortal head wound. How could you do that to a hill? And he goes on to say in his book, because I've read it, if it were a hill, why would the people of the world worship a resurrected hill? A hill that was not, at the time when John wrote, 5 hills. I mean, let's go back and read this for a second as if it's hills, all right? Let me go back and show you the verse again. All right, the verse reads, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. They are 7. Okay, no, I'm sorry. Where's the verse I want? I want the verse. Okay, I guess my bullet points works here. Let's just look at my bullet points. 5 have fallen, 1 is not yet come. The beast himself is an 8th, but belongs to the 7. Okay, let's pretend these are hills, okay? 5 hills have fallen. 1 hill is. 1 hill has not yet come. And the beast himself is an 8th hill, but belongs to the 7 hills. Does that make any sense at all? I hope it doesn't. All right, let's keep going. So, Rome, I think, is ruled out by the angel's own interpretation. Rome being mystery Babylon is ruled out. The focus is not on geography, but on rulers, on the unfolding of satanic kingdoms through history, culminating in the final Antichrist. So we're talking about the possibility of Rome being, again, I got to be careful here. I'm not saying that a revived Roman Empire couldn't be the system or the empire that comes back in the end times that Antichrist rules over. But when we're talking about someone receiving a mortal wound to the head that dies and then is resurrected, Rome is ruled out. That's what I mean, okay? The focus is not on geography that receives a mortal wound. The focus is on rulers and the unfolding of the satanic kingdoms throughout history, culminating in the final Antichrist, of which we know that Rome was one of those satanic kingdoms that was used and could likely be reused in the future. In fact, I think if you follow Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7 and chapter 8 and chapter 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, follow those and then use that to form the important, crucial backdrop to reading John's words here, which are clearly hearkening back to the Danielic passages I just mentioned, then it becomes apparent to me that Rome should play a very important part. She already did in the past, right, in Daniel chapter 2. And then when we get to chapter 7 with the beasts that Daniel sees, it seems to also tie into some form of revived empire that lived in the past. Again, we'll talk more about this later. Right now, we're just kind of touching on most of the highlights. But I go on to say that, speaking of the death of this person and his resurrection, this is why Chris White insists that we need to let Scripture interpret Scripture. The angels giving us the meaning. We don't need to force in Rome or any other city when it comes to the revival of the person from the dead. Although, again, could it be some form of empire that we could call Rome? Yeah, but we don't need to limit it there. In many ways, we could say that it will be simply a, when I say it, I'm talking about the seventh beast empire and the eighth one. It doesn't have to be a revived Roman Empire, but it seems to need to be able to control the Mediterranean area, which would include today most of Europe, East, what we would today call Turkey, but Eastern Asia back in the time, Asia Minor, but today would be Turkey. Most of what we call the Middle East now, which would include, Syria and Israel and Egypt. And then now we can keep drawing the picture. I'll put a map in the post-production so you can see this. As we're drawing out the map of the nations that surround the Mediterranean Sea, going down and going back towards the west again, we've got Egypt, and now we're in Upper Africa with I think Libya's over there, and Niger, and some of those other. If I'm just doing from memory, but you're looking at it in the YouTube land. But you get my point. Is ancient Rome was able to control much of that area in the past. In fact, I think she's the only one that did have most, if not all, of that area under her rule. Even the Islamic Caliphate didn't go as far west as, say, modern-day Europe today. But other nations exerted some control in certain places closer to the Middle East, namely Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. But when we got to Rome, we got a lot of geographical coverage. And then even if we want to bring in the Islamic, the Islamic powers, the Caliphate, the Turkish Empire, we can still see that even though they controlled much of that area, it still wasn't as much as Rome. But my point is that we're talking about the death of this person and the resurrection of this person. And that's why I say that we don't need to start speculating about it being a Rome. We don't even have to call it Rome when it comes to the empires. We could just say it's a seventh beast empire that rises to power at the end of days, that likely includes a lot of the geography today that we recognize today as Europe and Turkey and the Middle East and Iraq and Iran and Jordan and Egypt and Upper Africa and things like that. That's kind of what we're talking about when I say seventh beast empire, which the seventh ruler gets shot and resurrects, and he becomes the eighth, but his empire itself is largely the same. Let's keep going. Part 4, we're winding down. We got about 10 minutes left in the study. Part 4, the 10 horns and the final alliance, which is kind of why I spent a little bit more time to set up this particular discussion. Next, I talk about how that the angel explains the 10 horns. And this is kind of where it's getting a little bit more political and military. And that's why I kind of spent a little bit more time transitioning from what we were talking about earlier with the woman and the reading the Bible passages. Now we're kind of getting more into just military and politics. These are 10 kings who haven't yet received a kingdom, but will receive authority for 1 hour with the beast. How is that going to play out? Hard to say. Perhaps they will have some power on paper. Perhaps they'll have some delegated power, but weakened form of it. Either way, this shows us that the Antichrist doesn't rise alone. He has allies, right? I imagine that when he's having his war room discussions, I'll put like a little graphic in post-production of a military leader sitting in the middle of a table with 5 people on either side of him representing the 10 nations, and they're all like in military uniform. When he's having his wartime scenario games where he's talking about how he's slicing and dicing the world and controlling everything, he's not alone. He has allies. For a brief time, symbolized as 1 hour, these 10 rulers give him their power. So again, he's not unchallenged. If we read through the book of Daniel and even parts of Ezekiel, we're going to have to talk about how this all fits together. These 10 kings, what do they do with that power? Verse 14 tells us, it says they wage war against the Lamb. So what we know is that eventually this military machine that the Antichrist and these 10 kings put together, they do it for the purpose of striking out against the Lamb. Now this is interesting. If the Antichrist has declared himself to be God at the midpoint, he somehow is already aware that Jesus is truly going to return to Jerusalem to claim his rightful ownership over, and then kind of put the mystery Babylon aspect of Jerusalem down so that the true righteous Jerusalem can be resurrected of sorts. I know that we're going to have to work through this later because this is a major objection for those who say, Ariel, how can you and Chris White be right that Mystery Babylon is eschatological Jerusalem when Mystery Babylon is spoken of as being destroyed and never rising again, and yet Jerusalem will be reestablished? How can you say it's Jerusalem? Okay, I don't want to tip my cards right now, but there's a way to work through some of that. But suffice to say, somehow the Antichrist knows that Jesus is going to be returning to Jerusalem. So in Revelation chapter, I think it's around 15 or 16, he begins to muster his troops together and gather them into the Middle East where he can anticipate that Jesus is going to show up. And that's where he's going to do battle with them at the Battle of Armageddon. Because when Jesus returns on the white horse in Revelation 19, the Antichrist is there waiting for him with all of his troops. So this means that they must have known in advance that Jesus was going to return to Jerusalem. They wage war against the Lamb. So this points us, I say in my notes, directly to Armageddon, where the nations unite against Christ at his return. But the point is, have you ever noticed that they know in advance that Jesus is going to show up there? Somehow they know. They've been reading the prophecies. They know that Jerusalem is the place. Or could it be that Jesus already returned earlier, the rapture took place earlier, and that Jesus, instead of just going back up to heaven and staying there, he's actually been on planet Earth, going here and there, reaching out, ministering to Israelites who've been hiding out in the desert, in the southern desert, for 3.5 years. They fled from Antichrist. They've been hiding out, and Jesus is now down there pleading with them face to face to accept him and embrace him. And he's going to be leading this procession, this greater exodus, from the south back up north towards Jerusalem, towards the seat of Antichrist power, with the goal of unseating the Antichrist, defeating him once and for all, and establishing Jerusalem as his father's as the throne that his father has given him. Could that be what's going to be happening? And so that's why the Antichrist, aware of this figure who's already on earth, declaring himself to be Jesus, who's ministering to Jews and leading many of them into a genuine salvation experience, is marching towards Jerusalem. And therefore the Antichrist musters his armies and says, I'm going to meet you, right? Come on, bring it on. Come on, let's do battle. But somehow Jesus ends up in the sky on a horse and comes down from heaven. So I guess he has to go from earth back up to heaven, grab us, the saints, grab a bunch of angels, we all get on horses, and then we come down and we do battle to Battle of Armageddon or something like that. All right, we'll figure it out. In my notes, I say the angel gives us hope. Even though there is going to be a battle, we already know that the Lamb will overcome them. Why? Because he's Lord of Lords and King of Kings. So even in the darkest alliance of evil in history, Antichrist, who's Satan incarnate basically, 10 kings who have aligned with him, even in this dark hour, Christ remains sovereign. He allows it to happen until the words of God are fulfilled. Nothing is out of his control. It will get very dark. Remember, this is the time period, the tribulation that took place earlier. This is the time period which Christians will be losing their lives in mass. This is the time period when God's wrath will also be poured out on planet Earth. By the time we get to Armageddon, the earth will be practically, utterly in ruin, almost useless. But God allows these things to happen because God's in control. Nothing is out of his control. Let's go on to part 5. The beast turns on the woman, right? We're winding down our study. Finally, in verse 16 through 18, which we read tonight of Revelation chapter 17, we see the description of the shocking twist. The beast and the 10 kings will hate the harlot, which we're going to say is eschatological Jerusalem. They're going to strip her, devour her, and burn her with fire. So no matter who you say Mystery Babylon will be, Rome, Mecca, New York City, Jerusalem, Vatican City, or whoever you think it is, Salt Lake City, I don't know, San Francisco, whoever it is, the Antichrist and the 10 kings are going to turn on her. For whatever reason, they feel that she's used up her purpose. I think part of it has to do with the fact that she will be the seat not just of political power for Antichrist, but remember, he turned her into a religious power. Earlier than the midpoint in the first part, I think that he endorsed Judaism and allowed her to occupy a place as the world religion, tricking them into thinking that this is the Messianic age. I think that's likely a scenario that could go that direction. So for the first 3.5 years, Jerusalem was the undisputed religious capital of the world with the endorsement of the most powerful man in the world, Antichrist, at the time. And thus, they became very, very wealthy, according to Revelation chapter 17 and 18, the wealth with all the gold and stuff that she has. Right? Remember, she has to rebuild the temple, and that's a lot of gold there. One of the wonders of the world will be returning with the temple in Jerusalem. However, by the midpoint of the week and moving into the second half of Antichrist's career, the second half of the 70th week of Daniel, he doesn't seem to need the religious Jewish component anymore. He kind of takes over, kicks the Jews out, so to say, or subjugates them. Islam at this point in time, I think, has already been subjugated or destroyed or amalgamated into that fake version of Judaism, whatever that was in the first half. Whatever version of religion that was, call it what you will. It wasn't any true religion, but it was something that served the Antichrist's purpose to gain him wealth and power and prestige and the world's admiration. And then he gets shot, and then he comes back to life, and then he declares himself to God at the middle point of the week, and then he starts to begin to turn on Jerusalem, I think, at that point in time. He's like, I don't really need you anymore. I'm going to worship a God of fortresses, like it says in the book of Daniel. I think around chapter 11. He worships the God of fortresses. He doesn't, which is really Satan. He doesn't worship the God of his ancestors. In fact, it says in Daniel as well that he will not worship the God of his fathers, which I think gives him a claim to Jewish lineage myself. But point being is, at some point in time, politically and militarily speaking, he doesn't need this religion. He doesn't need it. And so he's like, nope, I'm done with you. So he and the 10 kings, they turn on her, they burn her. And let me continue now. This means the Antichrist will betray the very city that enthroned him, right? You ever thought about that? Think about this. For a time, Jerusalem will sit as queen, drunk with power, leading the nations in worship of the Antichrist. That's that false religion that kind of occupies prominently more of the first half of the week. Will it look like a Jewish religion? Yeah. Will it look like maybe a mix between Islam and Judaism? Could be. Like I said, Islam at that point in time will either be subjugated, destroyed, or mixed into Judaism, like maybe just one giant Abrahamic faith. Maybe even Islam, Judaism, and Christianity will all be kind of mixed up together into some form of syncretistic religion that serves the purpose of the Antichrist, and that Israel will be blind to this reality. I don't know what Muslims around the world will be doing, but Christians will probably be fooled. But, the Muslims are already fooled at this point right now, right? Currently, they're fooled. But the point being is that this end-time Jerusalem will be very rich because of all the merchants pouring their gold and wares into this city, whoever she turns out to be, which I think will be Jerusalem, leading to the nations worshiping the Antichrist. But then we know at the midpoint, the beast himself, at the midpoint, he will declare himself to be God. And then some time after that, the beast himself will turn against her and destroy her. Why will he do that? Because Satan never shares glory. He uses Jerusalem, then he discards her. And yet, I go on to say, verse 17 says, it is ultimately God's plan. God uses the beast's hatred to accomplish his judgment. The destruction of the harlot city is part of God's righteous decree. Let's draw our study to a close. Let me give you some, what I'm going to call a closing application and a preview of week 4. All right, this shouldn't take but 5 minutes. So, what have we learned tonight? Mystery Babylon is a great city, not just a system and not just a symbol. She's a city, right? No matter who you say she's going to be, she will in fact be a city. Rome, New York, Mecca, Vatican City, something like that. She's still a city. Point number 2, the beast is the Antichrist, mimicking Christ with a counterfeit resurrection. I believe he will be a man that is shot in the head or something to that effect. That talks about a head wound or a fatal wound. I don't know if it's a head wound, but some type of wound that appears to be fatal. And then there's a counterfeit resurrection. Or when I say counterfeit here, I don't mean that it won't be genuine. I mean that it will be, from Messiah's perspective, counterfeit, meaning since he's a counterfeit Messiah, his resurrection will be known to be counterfeit because Jesus only died once and only resurrected once. Thus, whatever the Antichrist goes through, which I believe will be a real death and resurrection, in the end, it's still a deception. That's what I mean by counterfeit. Point number 3, what we learned tonight is that the 7 heads are kings. They're not hills, so Rome is ruled out in terms of the city, in terms of the person being Rome. In other words, don't confuse the city with the system that could be the beast system itself. Could the beast system be what we might recognize as a revived Rome? Kind of, yeah, we could go in that direction. But when we're talking about who receives the wound, who is resurrected, think person, don't think city. That's what I mean by Rome is ruled out there. All right. What we also learned tonight is that the 10 horns are 10 kings. This goes all the way back to Daniel. The 10 horns are 10 kings who briefly ally with the beast against Christ. And the last bullet point is that the beast ultimately turns on the harlot city, fulfilling God's judgment. And what I notice is that all of this points consistently towards Jerusalem in the last days, a city that allies with the Antichrist, exalts him, and is then destroyed by him. Either way, even if I'm wrong, even if it's not Jerusalem, the other details are unmistakable. This city, whoever she turns out to be, she allies with the Antichrist, she exalts him, and then she's destroyed by him. So, Next week in chapter 3, what we're going to do is we're going to look more closely at the relationship between the woman and the beast and how Jerusalem, I believe, functions as a false high priest and at the details of her betrayal. But until then, I want you to reflect on this. I'm speaking to Christians now. Are we so focused on outward appearances, wealth, power, religious trappings, that we risk missing obedience to God's word? Because the harlot looked like a priest, but she was lawless. Don't be that way. If you're a believer and you look like a believer on the outside, then act that way on the inside, right? Don't chase after wealth. Don't chase after power or religious trappings. Seek after God. Seek first the kingdom of God. Seek his face. Seek his spirit. Those are the things that matter, okay? All right, I just want to say thank you for joining me tonight. Stay grounded in the word. Keep your eyes on Yeshua. And remember, no matter how hard it gets, the Lamb will overcome. Amen? Amen. That'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. This is a very important principle that I think gets lost to people who aren't Trinitarians. They seem to believe that the biblical definition of deity can apply to some being other than the one true God. And it appears to be that when we look at the Bible's definition of deity, a form of theos without the article, like it's used in John 1:1c, then to say that something is deity is to grant it identity with the one true God. And nothing else but the one true God has that form of ousia. Now, somehow humans, believers, are going to share in the glory of God, yes, but will we share in his divinity, like theosis? I'm not comfortable admitting that we're going to be sharing in that just yet. That sounds too Mormon to me, too close to Mormonism to me, becoming little gods. Point being, to say that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a little God, like the silly schoolboy Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation version of the Bible, grossly misunderstands that the Bible does not recognize small God, where the word God is referring to the divinity that God himself possesses. Understanding my reference here? It's almost like if we could call the divinity that God possesses, if we could call it an ingredient that a being could have, we could say that the Bible is trying to portray this idea that God uniquely possesses this ingredient, and that the three persons likewise share in this ingredient, undivided, equally across the three. It's not that they have three equal shares, like 30%, 33.3%, or 33.3%, or something like that. That's not what I mean. It's rather they all have 100%. That's what I mean. However, what the Bible does seem to be saying is that this ingredient that I'm calling deity is unique to God alone. Everything lesser that could be identified as an Elohim or a theos in the Greek doesn't possess this same ingredient. It could be created in the image of God, meaning have the same, say, economic job description as God, to be bearers of the truth and to promulgate God's truth throughout the earth, things like that, meaning even humans have this role. But the deity, that an ingredient that I'm using an analogy, this ingredient, it seems to be unique to God. Okay, so this bears relevance to the claim that there's three gods, three little gods, that somehow all have this same ingredient. No, in the Bible, it's either or. If you have this ingredient, then you are counted among that which is recognized by the Bible as God proper. God either identity or God predicatively. But either way, nothing else seems to be able to have this ingredient or this quality. And so that's why we cannot say that there's three gods. There's no such thing as a little God that has this same divine essence that the one true God has. This is again why Jesus falls into the category, the Son of God has the category of true God, because he possesses this divine essence as well. Let's turn to a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. This is the final 30 minutes of our hour-and-a-half long study. The first hour is a study on end-time events, eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We talk about Book of Revelation topics. At the moment, we're looking at Mystery Babylon. And this next 30 minutes is dedicated to Trinitarian-type topics. We have been talking about this form of Trinitarian model that's labeled monarchical Trinitarianism, or MT. And Dr. Joshua Sijuati is one of the more vocal proponents of this model of Trinity. Dr. Bo Branson is also a champion of this particular model. I myself have been studying this model for well over a year, but I've never really articulated it to my students until now. And so I've worked my way down through a paper that I wrote that outlines what this model looks like, why I'm embracing it, and my journey towards using this type of language going forward. But what I want to do now for you is begin to work my way down through what I call anticipated counter-arguments to monarchical Trinitarianism. Okay. For those of you who don't know what it means, let's see if I mention it in my notes. Okay. My first objection, it sounds like subordinationism. All right. Let's talk about this. But first, let me do this. I don't think I actually defined it. Well, maybe I did. Give me a moment. Let me just look back real quick. I talk about Sijuati's view of the Trinity. Summary. Let me see. What's the best way to define? I'm trying to find like a maybe just a very succinct definition of monarchical Trinitarianism. Let me just do it this way: monarchical Trinitarianism. I'm using right now at the moment on my on my computer. I'm just using the AI overview that's built into Google. If you were to Google search, and here's the definition given: monarchical Trinitarianism is a theological view emphasizing the Father as the sole monarch or ultimate source within the Trinity, while maintaining the Father, Son, and Spirit are one God, sharing the same divine nature. In this view, the Father is God in the primary or nominal sense, being uncreated and the ground of being for the Son and the Spirit. The Son and the Spirit are also God in a secondary or predicative sense, as they share the divine essence with the Father, but their existence is derived from the Father, not from themselves. Okay, so right away when you listen to it, if you are a classic, what I'm calling Latin Trinitarian or egalitarian Trinitarian, or just your standard social Trinitarian, and you're wondering, well, what are all those? Your basic Trinitarian that you find in your average Catholic or Protestant church. That's what I mean by all those other fancy labels. So if you're one of those, in other words, monarchical Trinitarianism isn't one of those. Monarchical Trinitarianism is more associated with Greek Orthodox forms of religion. So it's a Eastern Christianity, not Western, like as in Rome or Catholicism, but the church in the East. So right away, when you listen to the East's description, one of the first things that pops into your head is, aha, I see the flaw. The Son and the Spirit are God in a secondary or predicative sense. They share the divine essence, but their existence is derived from the Father, not from themselves. Sounds like you're lowering God, or you're lowering Jesus from the spot of being God, and therefore, this is the weakness of your model. In other words, you are teaching subordinationism. All right, that's the primary charge. So let's go back down into my study and answer that objection. It sounds like subordinationism. Now, what is subordinationism? Let's see if I can get a definition. I don't know if my dictionary here is going to do it. Nope, no results. Let's search with Google. Subordinationism. All right, here we go. Same thing like we did earlier. I'm using the little AI overview as an answer. Subordinationism is a theological doctrine within the Christian Trinity that states the Son and the Holy Spirit are subordinate to the Father in essence or being, not just in role. Notice that very important line right up front. So we're talking about ontological subordination. This view, subordinationism, was debated in the early church with proponents like Origen, emphasizing the Father's monarchy. However, Orthodox Christianity ultimately, when it says Orthodox though, even though it's got a capital O, it doesn't mean Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. It means Orthodox meaning that which is proper, that which is accurate Christianity, the kind that is worshipped, or the in terms of Trinity, the kind that is championed by most Catholics and Protestants. So that's what I mean by Orthodox, and Orthodox, by the way. But this article goes on to say, however, Orthodox Christianity ultimately rejected subordinationism, affirming the co-equality and co-eternality of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a principle articulated at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Okay, so going back over to monarchical Trinitarianism. If, according to monarchical Trinitarianism, like I mentioned earlier, like it says in this clause of this definition, the Son and Spirit are God in a secondary predicative sense, and they share the divine essence with the Father, but their existence is derived. Basically, we're making the claim that the Father and the Son don't share the same type of aseity. What is aseity, by the way? Aseity means, let's draw another definition. Give me a second. Aseity is, what? What do you mean? Give me a second. My little dictionary doesn't show, so let's pull it here. Aseity. We got to pull up all these little definitions. All right, this one. Aseity is, let me zoom that a little bit. Aseity, the quality of being, existing of and from itself, possessing absolute self-sufficiency, independence, and autonomy without dependence on any external cause or source. It is a theological concept primarily applied to God to describe a being that is self-derived, self-existent, and the ultimate origin of everything else. The term comes from the Latin phrase a se, meaning from self. Now, is God the only one that is a se? Or, Father is only a se, or do Son and Spirit also share aseity? All right, so let's talk about this. Subordinationism. Challenge. People might say, Ariel, Mr. Monarchical Trinitarianism, Mr. Monarchical Trinitarian, if you say the Father is the one true God and the Son and the Spirit derived from him, aren't you making them lesser beings or subordinate in essence? This is a valid charge in the sense that it's a valid concern, but it's not a valid charge if you misunderstand the heretical form, or at least heterodoxical form of subordinationism, like we just said earlier. All right, what's my response? No. MT explicitly denies that the Son or Spirit are lesser in essence. That's why I keep saying ontological essence, right? Their, speaking Son and Spirit, their full divinity is eternally derived, not created or caused in time. Let me just pause and let that sink in. Son and Spirit are eternal, just like the Father. There was never a time when the Son wasn't. There's never a time when the Spirit wasn't. Even though God is the arche, the monarch, the source, the Son and Spirit derive their eternal existence from the Father. Now you're saying, but Ariel, that's contradictory. No, follow me. The Son and Spirit receive their personal hypostatic distinction from the Father, but share the identical divine nature. Aha! That's how we articulate it without contradiction. Father is Father, Son is Son, and Spirit is Spirit. There's where we have our distinctions. That's where we see persons. But at the same time, we have this one undivided divine nature that is equal across the persons. No division, no diminishment. All right? Father, Son, Spirit all share in the same divine nature, undivided. Everything that the Father has in terms of divinity, the Son does. Everything the Son has in terms of divinity, the Spirit has, and everything the Spirit has in terms of divinity, divine nature, the Father has. So it comes right back around. So it's what we call perichoresis, interpenetration is what the Greeks call it, but I don't want to get into that just yet. So the full divinity is eternally derived. It's not created or caused in time. So when we call the Son begotten, right, monogenes in the Greek, it's an eternal begetting. And I realize that term creates tension because it's language related to the way parents have offspring. Begotten, right? I was begotten. I was begotten by my parents. They gave birth to me. My father and mother got together and here I am. That's how begetting works. Well, in the temporal sense, that makes sense. The temporal sense makes sense, right? Man and woman join together and out comes a baby. Well, in God's sense, that doesn't have to be because God's outside of the physics that we know. He's a, what do we call him? A rarefied object. The being of God is a rarefied being. He's a rarefied object. He is outside of the temporal time frame that we're aware that we know. So he doesn't need to fall into those. He doesn't have to share the same categories that we do as temporal beings. So the Son is uncreated, and yet he is begotten. It's part of his hypostatic distinction from the Father. In fact, it's in his label Son. Remember I talked about this before. When we use the phrase analytic, it's analytic that a father must have a son. When I say analytic, I mean that the label Father implies offspring. Otherwise, Father doesn't make any sense. That's what I mean by analytic. Likewise, Son implies parents. Otherwise, the word Son loses its force of meaning. So, in the persons of the Trinity, Father and Son are unique. Father is Father, Son is Son. We don't confuse. And yet, we never stop to try to figure out why Son is called Son. Why can't we simply call the Son the Father? They share the same essence. They have the same ousia, right? It's a homoousios, one nature. True, Jesus is equally divine as much as Father is. The Son and Father share the same divinity. They have the same equal divinity. That's why Jesus can be called God in many ways. Also, he's representative of God here on earth. He's the visible representative of the invisible Father. He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The Father is invisible. No one can see him, but you can look at me, and there's nothing lacking in what you're seeing as if you were wishing to see the Father. You don't have to look past me to see something that I lack that the Father has. Everything the Father has, I have, except the term fatherhood. Other than that, you're looking at him, right? You want to see God? Look at me. So that's not to say that the Son and the Father are the same. They're not the same person, right? We don't confuse that. So they share in the identical divine nature. There is no difference in power, glory, or substance. The difference is in their personal mode of origin. The Father is unbegotten. Again, we're using origin there only for analytic sake, because we humans can't quite wrap our minds around eternality, right? Because we're finite beings. We can't fathom a being that has never had a beginning. We don't quite grasp eternity yet. One day we will, but for now, our language kind of fails us. And so when I say origin there, don't misunderstand what I'm saying there. The Father is unbegotten, the Son is begotten, and yet they're both eternal, right? The Spirit proceeds, or spirates is how the ancients called as in like a spiral. Spirals out of the Father. This is why the Father is called the source. But all three share one divine essence. That's not subordinationism, which would say the Son is ontologically inferior. So this charge is patently false because of the classical definition of the heretical or heterodoxical version known as subordinationism. Monarchical Trinitarianism does not suffer from subordinationism in that category. So rather, the divine essence that's shared is a relational hierarchy within co-equality. So in one sense, it's recognized that no matter which form of Trinity you hold to, no matter which model, you have to use the language the Bible gives us. Father, Son, Spirit. Even if you are a non-Trinitarian, you still recognize Father, Son, Spirit. You recognize those three persons, even if there's only one God. Even if you're a biblical Unitarian and you say the Father is the one true God and Jesus is a person who's fully human, he's still a separate person from God the Father, and he's still the Son of his Father. What's my point? My point is that this familial language of Father, Son, Spirit is biblical, and it's warranted, and you ready for the bombshell? At the base level of recognizing that Son submits to his Father, we have a form of subordinationism going on there. Maybe functionally, in terms of economy, in terms of salvation, history, Son submits himself to the Father in terms of willingly going to the cross, willingly submitting his will into the hands of the Father, explaining to people, it's not my will, but thine be done, right? We know he prayed that in the garden. Father, take this cup from me, but nevertheless, not my will. This is the Son admitting that the Father is greater. You know, he said that as well. He said, the Father is greater than I. And this trips non-Trinitarians up. How can Jesus be God if he says that the Father is greater than me, right? Okay, so my point is that we don't need to run away from this term subordinationism unless we're always thinking that it's referring to ontological, and that's where it gets heretical or at least heterodoxical. Okay, so let's move on to the next objection. I don't know how many of these there are, I can't remember, but there's enough to keep us occupied for the next 15 minutes. Objection number 2. Well, they're not numbered, but you know what I mean. It sounds Eastern Orthodox, Ariel, not Protestant or biblical. I don't know if I want to be on board with this MT, monarchical Trinitarianism. Now, I'm being funny at the moment because I've heard internet people describe it as monarchical, and I've heard other people use the word monarchical. Is there a difference? Not really. They're both the same thing. It's just that I think from a scholarly perspective, monarchical is the one that's favored in scholastic circles. Monarchical is kind of the everyday street description of it, so don't get confused. But what often does happen is that non-Orthodox Christians, such as evangelicals and Catholics, they say, that sounds too Eastern Orthodox. I don't know if that's biblical. All right, here's the challenge. Some might say this is just an Eastern Orthodox doctrine. Why bring it into Protestant theology? All right, here's my response. It is true that MT is strongly championed in Eastern Orthodoxy, but its roots are entirely biblical. Yeah, that's right. This is why I am not uncomfortable embracing it. I'm not an Eastern Orthodox, and I have no desire to embrace Eastern Orthodoxy. All right, just wanted to let you guys know, I, Ariel, HaNaviy, am not converting to Eastern Orthodoxy. I am not Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible answer man. He did convert to Eastern Orthodoxy. Good for him. But that's not me. I'm not doing that. I'm comfortable being a Messianic Jew. I love being a Messianic Jew. All right, so the Bible itself portrays the Father as the fount or font or foundation. That's what that word fount means there. The fount of divine life, right? John 5:26, 1 Corinthians 8:6. There's actually a ton of verses to support this idea of the Father is the arche, right? It's not just these two verses. I just only brought in 2 or 3 just for a sample representation. But you go back, look those up on your own. So the Father, the Bible portrays the Father as the fount, the source. The Son is eternally begotten, and the Spirit is proceeding from the Father, right? John 15:26. These are biblical structures which the Cappadocians, remember that's Basil of, I think it's Basil the Great, Basil of Caesarea, and then we've got the 2 Gregories, Gregory Nazianzus and Nazianzus, however you want to write it, and then Gregory of Nyssa, I think those are the 2 Gregories. But either way, we've got 2 Gregories and a wow, who's the other guy I just mentioned? I just lost his name. Either way, so we got those 3 are the Cappadocians, the 2 Gregories, and the guy I just mentioned a second ago that now his name is gone out of my head. All right, that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. I'll flash it in post-production. So these guys are the Cappadocians. And they were some very instrumental church fathers. You know what? I can't resist. Give me a second. The Cappadocians can refer to the Cappadocian Fathers, a trio of influential early Christian theologians: Basil the Great, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Gregory of Nyssa. Yeah, just the 3 I mentioned from Cappadocia and modern-day Turkey, who shaped Christian doctrine. It can also refer to the Cappadocian Greeks, an ethnic Greek community native to the region of Cappadocia. But no, I'm talking about the 2 Gregories and Basil, not to be confused with the herb that I put on my pasta last night. Okay, just being funny. All right, so back to my little note here. We've got these biblical structures about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Cappadocians simply gave them formal philosophical language. The Bible gives us the license to go in this direction. Protestants have sometimes neglected that aspect, but there's no such contradiction between being Protestant and recovering biblical patristic insights on the Father's monarchy. So let's keep going. Next objection: MT divides the persons too much and risks tritheism, right? Because of the focus on Father being the monarch and Son and Spirit deriving from the Father in some way. Too much division going on. I feel uncomfortable. All right, let's look at the challenge. Critics might argue, if the Father is the one true God in a special sense, then aren't you monarchical Trinitarians dangerously dividing the Godhead into 3 different gods? All right, let's look at my response. That's an important concern. All right, we always want to be concerned about how our language is true to the Bible. However, MT safeguards the unity of God precisely because the Son and Spirit derive their divinity from the Father, who is the one ultimate divine source. Again, when we're talking about deriving or derivatives, we don't know how the Father shares the divine essence with Son and Spirit. That's why I said fancy philosophical terms get introduced: interpenetration, perichoresis. Let's pull that one up because I know you guys are probably going, what? Perichoresis. There we go. Perichoresis is a Christian. Let me shrink that a little bit. There we go. Perichoresis is a Christian theological concept from the Greek language referring to the mutual indwelling, interpenetration, and co-inhering of the 3 persons of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, within one another, while each retains its distinct identity and shares the same divine essence. This concept emphasizes the profound unity and eternal communion of God, often described metaphorically as a dance of love. So, perichoresis, or interpenetration. It's a mystery. I don't understand how Father, Son, and Spirit have the same essence and yet are distinct in person. So that's where mystery is retained. But what I do know is that the Bible gives us the permission to identify that Father, again, analytic. I'm going to look that one up so you guys know what I'm saying there. analytic. All right. Relating to or using analysis or logical reasoning. Analytical, true by virtue of the meaning of the words or concepts used to express it, so that its denial would be a self-contradiction. Okay? Analytic or analytical. It's an adjective. So to say that the Father is not the Son preserves the personhood, yes, but it also preserves the basic meaning of the words. So how can Son be derived from Father? Well, in natural sense, we understand that. We're just simply taking the natural meaning of the word Son and applying it to the Godhead, the Trinity, but realizing that there are limits to this model, to this picture, because the Son eternally comes from the Father, eternally begotten, not temporally begotten. So Father, Son, and Spirit derive their divinity from the Father in eternity, who is the one ultimate divine source. That means their divine essence is identical with the Father's. You cannot get three gods because their deity is numerically one and undivided. This is a very important principle that I think gets lost to people who aren't Trinitarians. They seem to believe that the biblical definition of deity can apply to some being other than the one true God. And it appears to be that when we look at the Bible's definition of deity, a form of theos without the article, like it's used in John 1:1c, then to say that something is deity is to grant it identity with the one true God. And nothing else but the one true God has that form of ousia. Now, somehow humans, believers, are going to share in the glory of God, yes, but will we share in his divinity, like theosis? I'm not comfortable admitting that we're going to be sharing in that just yet. That sounds too Mormon to me, too close to Mormonism to me, becoming little gods. Point being, to say that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a little G-O-D, like the silly schoolboy Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation version of the Bible, grossly misunderstands that the Bible does not recognize small G-O-D, where the word G-O-D is referring to the divinity that God himself possesses. Understanding my reference here? It's almost like if we could call the divinity that God possesses, if we could call it an ingredient that a being could have, we could say that the Bible is trying to portray this idea that God uniquely possesses this ingredient, and that the three persons likewise share in this ingredient, undivided, equally across the three. It's not that they have three equal shares, like 30%, 33.3%, or 33.3%, or something like that. That's not what I mean. It's rather they all have 100%. That's what I mean. However, what the Bible does seem to be saying is that this ingredient that I'm calling deity is unique to God alone. Everything lesser that could be identified as an Elohim or a Theos in the Greek doesn't possess this same ingredient. It could be created in the image of God, meaning have the same, say, economic job description as God, to be bearers of the truth and to promulgate God's truth throughout the earth, things like that, meaning even humans have this role. But the deity, that an ingredient that I'm using an analogy, this ingredient, it seems to be unique to God. Okay, so this bears relevance to the claim that there's three gods, three little G-O-D-S, that somehow all have this same ingredient. No. In the Bible, it's either or. If you have this ingredient, then you are counted among that which is recognized by the Bible as God proper. God either identity or God predicatively. But either way, nothing else seems to be able to have this ingredient or this quality. And so that's why we cannot say that there's three gods. There's no such thing as a little G-O-D that has this same divine essence that the one true God has. This is again why Jesus falls into the category, the Son of God has the category of true God, because he possesses this divine essence as well. They are truly distinct persons, yet share exactly the same divine essence. It is tritheism, not monarchical Trinitarianism, that posits three self-originating gods. All right, and let me look. There's two more and a summary. I think I'll stop here. It's a good place to stop. I don't need to keep pushing this further. I'm not in a rush. We'll let this go on for another week. But I'll tip my hand a little bit so you can see it. The next objection we're going to look at next week is objection. Jesus is called, and notice there's capital G-O-D in my commentary. Jesus is called God in many places. How can you then say the Father alone is the one true capital G-O-D? We'll get into that next week. But that'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. Let's close in prayer. Abba, bless your name. I admit I don't have all the answers, but I know you do. And so I'm going to keep pressing into your word. I'm going to keep availing myself of your spirit. I'm going to keep connected to the one true Messiah. I'm going to stay connected to this branch, because that's where life is found. And I know in him are all the hidden mysteries and wisdom of God. And so I thank you that it has pleased you to pour all your fullness into your Son. And so that I can know who you are, Lord, that I can know who you are, Father, and I can bless you as God. Thank you for the previous study on eschatology. I don't have all the answers there either. What a baffling topic. But Lord, one thing I do know is if I focus on you, I will be prepared. I won't be duped and disappointed when you come. No matter when you come, or if I don't see you, if I die before you come, I know that I'll be resurrected one day. But Lord, you will come. And so I'll keep my eyes focused on you, not on the dates, not on politicians, not on history. I'll keep my eyes focused on you. And in that, I will not be disappointed. And I'll be careful to give you the praise and the glory. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.